Brian Crowley here, and Brian, it's that season where people go, at the TV. You can't get away from them on air, online, the political ads. Hard to ignore that sea of political ads, and of course running right up until Election Day, and they can stretch, and that would be a nice way of putting it, times the truth. Everybody does it, and take facts out of proportion to distort the record, and you've been helping our viewers understand how to weave their way through that. Here's one example. Our Contact 5 investigator, Dave Bohman, looking into an ad by U.S. Congresswoman Lois Frankel.
Who does Dan Francis think he is?
In her ad, Congresswoman Lois Frankel calls Republican challenger Dan Francis a threat to abortion rights.
Francis would ban abortions nationally, forcing women who are raped to give birth, making women and their doctors criminals.
That is 100% false.
Dan Francis says the ad is so wrong. He's written a letter to the Congresswoman, quote, "I demand you immediately remove your ads making these false claims as well as other lies." Francis says he's pro-life and he supports the Supreme Court's recent Roe v. Wade decision. But he says that's not the same as potentially voting in Congress to ban abortions nationwide.
I'm a strict constitutionalist, and I believe these are the kind of decisions that should be made at the state level and not the federal level.
And this is where the two candidates are at odds over the challenger's stand. Congresswoman Frankel says Francis's support of the High Court's decision opens the door to a nationwide abortion ban.
What's happened since that decision? Almost half the states in this country have now banned or severely restricted abortion.
Francis says half the states in the country made their own choice, not the U.S. Supreme Court. And he says if he's elected to Congress...
So I would vote against any kind of abortion ban or any law affecting abortion.
Frankel has no plans to pull the commercial.
Dan Francis is anti-choice.
I stand by that.
Dave Bohman, WPTV News Channel 5.
Francis says he's considering a lawsuit over the ad. Congresswoman Frankel, as you heard, stands by them. Brian, by the way, Congressional District 22 for them. And we're talking, I just want a little programming note, we're talking about the districts as they are now reshaped. Because some people say, wait, I thought their district, different numbers, they're reordered. So when you hear us mention 23 or 22, it's the district and the race they're running for in that seat. Exactly. Brian, your take on ads, I mean, it happens all the time, but it's hard for viewers to parse it all. Hard for all of us to.
Unfortunately, most political ads have a lot of nonsense in them, if not outright lies.
And neither side has a monopoly on that.
And both sides are guilty of it. They've been guilty of it for decades. It's not new. The biggest harm may be, though, that a lot of the ads are, for want of a better term, a little underground. They're on social media sites. They're on podcasts, sometimes little-known podcasts. There's a lot of other avenues where people hear and see these ads, and they may not necessarily, and ads that necessarily that the mainstream are not seeing. So there's a little chance to identify what's wrong in these ads, and then talk about them.
No, it's difficult, but just as we do here, you at home, the best way to get in the sunshine with all that, do a deep dive, go to candidate forums, read deeply, read what their platforms say, ask questions. It's what we do. It's what all of us need to do.
Well, the questions is particularly important. We have candidates who refuse to debate. Yep. We have candidates who refuse to talk to the media. We have candidates who refuse to take questions from the public. That's nonsense. That should not be allowed. Their responsibility is to respond to the public.
You and I have talked about it. I see more and more this cycle than any I've seen, and you and I have talked a lot about it. That can be its own debate. As we look toward Election Day, we've got early voting going on. Tampa Bay Times, and you've been talking about the trend. Again, Tampa Bay Times, I pulled this. According to recently released data, about 58,000 more Hispanic voters registered with Florida's Republican Party between 2020 and 2022, resulting in growth that far outpaces the party's gains among voters of all races. The Hispanic vote, it's not the first article I've seen. New York Times mentioned that, and Governor Ron DeSantis' presumptive lead among Hispanics. We're seeing perhaps a sea change here, and as we move toward Election Day, we see what other polling numbers say. At the moment, Republicans, broadly speaking, statewide, I'm talking throughout, feel pretty good, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And Democrats last week, some of them were starting to complain about the Florida Democratic Party, the state effort. They say not enough has been done. They haven't raised the money they were supposed to raise. They haven't done the outreach to voters that they were supposed to do. So when you have your fellow Democrats loudly complaining and actually asking for the leader of the state party to step down, you know that they internally think they have big problems ahead. And their losses among Hispanic voters, I mean, if they lose Miami-Dade County in this coming election cycle,
And there's
that will
some
be
concern,
a
yeah.
very big deal because the loss of Hispanic voters, it will not be easy to get them back in future elections.
And that big pool of voters, and then more broadly speaking, the big pool of Democratic voters that the statewide candidates need, all right here in Broward, well, starting with Palm Beach County, Broward, Miami-Dade, Hillsborough, of course, another area for that. But we're going to have to see how that plays out, whether they can pull in those numbers. But when we look at the local congressional races, in 20, Sheriff Phyllis McCormick, not a sense that you have that one, that's a majority-minority district.
Right.
Then you look at what will be the new 21, 22, and 23. Kind of take us through the landscape of the local races, where Democrats still in Palm Beach County and Broward have a sizable advantage. Treasure Coast, more of a Republican lean.
Yeah, I think at this stage we're not going to see a big turnover in local congressional races or in legislative races. I think what we're going to see is that in seats where Democrats have traditionally won, they're going to remain Democratic, but the margins may be smaller than they've been in the past. Ron DeSantis is very popular. Democrats know that, and he's going to help drive out the vote. And we shouldn't discount the fact that Donald Trump is planning a rally in Miami the Sunday before the election, and that will help rev up the Republican voters there. So margins may be narrower, even in the certain Democratic districts.
And to that point, again, we've got incumbents in 3 of our 4 districts. The open seat with Mr. Budd and Mr. Moskowitz, one of the reasons we wanted to focus on those candidates. Brian, President Biden also expected to be in town in just a couple of days. How do Democratic candidates look at that? Because the Republicans are trying to hang his economic policies around them. How do you kind of maneuver that? Charlie Crist says he'd like to be with them. How's that play?
Well, there are more and more indications that the biggest problem the Democratic Party may have had this election cycle was focusing too much on abortion and not enough on the economy. And bringing Joe Biden in at this point may be a little too late in Florida for him to significantly help. He's going to be with Val Demings, who's running against Marco Rubio.
Rubio, not right, and Charlie Crist was the one who added. Val Demings also, we're expecting
Right.
her there. Charlie's the one who said, well, I'd love to get some FaceTime. Ms. Demings
I think it's almost a nothing to lose moment. I mean, it's not. I don't think Joe Biden in Florida is hugely popular, even among Democrats. I think there's a bit of a yawn factor to it, and a huge disappointment that they haven't focused on the economy and crime and other important issues.
Ryan, thank you, and we'll be back with more in a moment.